everyone, and welcome to the second satellite event leading up to the 2025 International River Symposium. My name is Eva Abal, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of facilitating our amazing array of speakers and presenters today, as well as our panelists. But before we officially begin the event, I have three quick announcements for our audience, please. The first one, of course, is to thank you all for joining us today. We are very excited, as I mentioned before. The second one is that this session is being recorded, and you will have received a notice saying that it is being done so. What we will do is we will share the recording with you after the event. The last one is a fervent plea. Please keep your microphones muted so that it won't disturb our speakers unless you are invited to speak, please. So Joe and Olivia will also help us in muting your respective microphones. With that, I will now hand over to our CEO, Jody Bignell, to acknowledge country and welcome you all officially. Thanks, Jode.
Thanks, Eva. Welcome to a global network of river leaders and change makers. It's through sharing in forums like these that together we really can make the world a better place. So thank you very much all for being here. Before we start this Symposium satellite event, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet. Here in Brisbane, it's the Jagera and the Turrbal people. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and recognise their valuable contribution to our rivers and our environment. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this event, the second of four, which leads us into the main event, the 26th International River Symposium, to be held in conjunction with the Brisbane Festival this coming September from the 8th to the 10th. We'd really love you to come to our river city in Brisbane and join us for the International River Symposium, particularly for the event, the River Fire event on the 6th, which is the Saturday night. We'll kick it off with that. Today's session's particularly exciting as we explore the theme of reviving our rivers, fast-tracking solutions for climate resilience. At the IRF, this topic is very close to our hearts as it embodies our vision of thriving and resilient rivers for future generations. And I'd especially like to thank the very talented and amazing IRF team who I get to work with every day for pulling this together. You're amazing and I'm lucky, thank you. I'd also like to say thanks to the board for your leadership and support, and to Dr. Stuart Orr and Ian Rutherford for leading the conversation today, to Philip Weller and to Bark Falcons for their leadership and guidance, and to the three river restoration networks who've joined us today from Asia, Australia and Europe. For over 2 decades, the International River Foundation has championed river management, protection and restoration. Protecting our rivers is protecting our future. And given all that's going on within the world's political and environmental landscape right now, it's more important than ever to have these conversations and come together collectively as individuals and organisations to take responsibility and drive positive action. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment to also express our sincere gratitude to our series sponsor, Armour Waterways. Thank you, Steve, for it's through your commitment and partnership in supporting the International River Foundation and the Symposium that we can run these kind of events. And so I'd like to hand over to you, Steve, to say a few words, but thank everyone again and wish you all a productive and insightful satellite event. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Jody. It's an absolute honour for Armour Waterways to be the proud sponsors of this satellite event series. We're a international river cruise company that takes over 100,000 guests annually in all-inclusive luxury to the world's most iconic rivers and waterways around Europe, Asia, Egypt, Southern Africa, and very soon to be the Columbia on the new Magdalena River will be the first ever river cruise line to travel in that area. We're very proud of our sponsorship. If you want more information on Armour Waterways, please visit our website, www.amawaterways.com, and over to the IRF team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jody, for leading the second satellite. As Jody has indicated, the theme really is around river revival, and it's about just not about revival, but fast-tracking solutions for climate resilience. The event has three components. The first one will be about the context, talking more about the journey, the river restoration journey so far, and hopefully the river restoration journey in the future as well, which Stuart will talk to a little bit. The next one is really showcasing different river restoration networks. Thanks to Bart for actually that vision of getting the three river restoration networks, and you will hear the passion in the way they do their work. The last one is really a special group of reactor panelists that will be looking at river restoration from different perspectives. And I will have the joy of facilitating the four of them. So it is my pleasure now to introduce briefly our first context speaker, Dr. Stuart Orr, who also sits on the IRF board. With a career dedicated to river conservation, finance, and policy, Stuart has worked across over 40 countries, shaping strategies that connect businesses, food, energy, and water. Stuart's work has helped drive economic incentives, bankable financing, and global conservation action. Stuart has been instrumental in launching the incredible Freshwater Challenge. If you haven't heard of it, he will talk more about it today. It is my pleasure to hand over to you, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My pleasure to be here today. Let's dive right in, Olivia. So my talk today is going to be, as Eva said, really hitting the sort of political and the changing and testing political landscape. And I wanted to start with this piece of work that we did with the General Institute of Water Planning from China, a river restoration guide a number of years ago. And I thought that this first framing is important. Understanding the context of the work in which we do in restoration globally is a combination, of course, of the river health that we seek to achieve as river professionals and restoration experts, but understanding the political, economic context of those interventions. I think that's extremely important and very, very crucial to our work going forward. Next interview. So what's the reason for WWF's interest in this work in restoration? Well, I have to be very honest with you. As a conservation organization, we look at the biodiversity crisis as our starting point, and understanding that biodiversity crisis is what drives our organization. Now, increasingly, and obviously, I can't explain that to everybody as a chief motivating reason why restoration needs to happen. We have to have other incentives and other arguments, but it's very important, I think, to be honest about where we are coming from. Next, please, Olivia. And of course, those of us on the call today are quite aware of some of these statistics. The impact that wetlands have had globally, the species decline, which has been significant, the increasing impact that water scarcity is having for people in the world, and that's incredibly important for our agenda. And of course, the percentage of GDP that's at risk because of water events going forward. All of these things are alarming statistics, but I would argue very important incentives as well for us to do our work and to champion restoration. Next, please. We're quite familiar with these kinds of things in the press. In fact, I think it is the awareness that people are starting to gather from the changing climate and what climate change actually means. It is putting rivers and water on the front pages of newspapers around the world. What's this got to do with restoration? Well, what it's doing is it's actually bringing this issue to the public in a way that we have never been able to bring it to the public. And that awareness of the role of water and climate change and rivers in our lives, I think, gives us opportunities to promote restoration on very different grounds. Next, please. And of course, we know that the effects of climate change are most immediately and acutely be expressed through water. I really like this quote from Salim Al-Hook: water is to adaptation as carbon is to mitigation. And again, that increasing awareness is really helping us to think about situating restoration very differently, I would suggest, than it has been over the last 20 or 30 years. Next, please. And we're also noticing that the amount of people coming into water from the financial sectors, insurance sectors, the private sector, they're looking at water completely differently from a perspective maybe of stranded assets or of interruption of supply chains. All of these give us, I believe, incentives and opportunities and potentially partnerships to be thinking about very differently about how we do restoration going forward. And I'll talk a little bit about that now. Olivia, please. This is some work we did with Royal Haskelley. If I go back to some of our work on nature-based solutions and restoration from 5, even 10 years ago, our ability to really cost that out and show in economic terms the importance of ecosystems to economies upstream and downstream was just not possible. Well, what's really interesting about where we are now is the real understanding of bringing in economic incentives, cost benefit analysis, long-term incentives, and even payback periods for investors in systems because of the way we are able to connect them to economic activities, etc. Why is this important? This is important because if we can get better at this kind of modeling, then the ability for us to bring in people into our world of restoration for very different reasons, perhaps, than we are here, is a great motivating factor. Next, please, Olivia. And of course, there's a very changing global political landscape out there. The CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity, has set out their new biodiversity framework. We're hearing about 2030 targets around restoration, whether that's coming from the CBD or whether it's just national plans around the 30 by 30 agenda. There's this really, really strong push these days for thinking about what we need to protect in the long term. And that matters at the political environment level because we can use those frameworks as we go forward. Next, please, Olivia. We call this the Rio Trio Plus. So if you dig around what the UNCCD is saying, or the UNFCCC, or the Ramsar Convention, you can start to see that there are a number of global conventions that are very accommodating to river restoration. And why is this important? We all appreciate that the UN has different levels of power, etc. But nonetheless, what I've seen over the last few years is that the political momentum emerging around these alignments of these conventions is super important and something we need to be paying attention to. Next, please. And this is where the Freshwater Challenge came from. So out of that 30 by 30 agenda for land and sea, there was a very, very strong push within the Convention of Biological Diversity to include inland waters. And it was a very big political fight, I have to say. And we joined hands with a number of other organizations, you can see their logos at the bottom here, to work with countries to identify what are the 30% of the rivers that you need to protect in your country. And we came up with global targets, we came up with some strategies, and we are now working on financial incentives. But the point here is that having growing political frameworks in which we can fit our restoration work is very, very important. Next slide, please, Olivia. And together with the countries over the last couple of years, we have come up with those targets: 300,000 kilometers of restored degraded rivers, 350 million hectares of degraded wetlands, for example. Now, having countries set individual targets is really important because then we can work together with the countries, with their partners, with institutions, in identifying those restoration sites because countries have set targets around them. This has grown organically. It started in the Ramsar Convention. Next slide, please, Olivia. And has now built to 50 countries, plus the European Union. And while the objective is never to get every country in the world, almost every month another country is joining the Freshwater Challenge and will join us at upcoming COPs to identify and list out the amount of hectares and wetlands and river restoration targets that they are setting. And it will allow us in the coming years to start building out those political and economic incentives to start the work and work with all of you and all of your different associations to be the ones that help countries achieve those restoration goals. Next, please. I wanted to include these last two slides in my last 30 seconds to really sort of think about how we can use this moment, this very testing political and changing environment to our advantage. This is a word cloud of ways in which I would suggest most of us think of river restoration. Terminologies like stewardship, inclusion, etc. Next slide, please, Olivia. And this is my last slide. This is how the discourse is playing out on the political right. And if you think about this, this just requires us to think very differently about the words that we use, the incentives that we think about, the people that are affected by and impacted by climate change in rivers, so that we can start to have those conversations about financing and addressing restoration in this challenging environment, and understand where other people are coming from. I think it's a really interesting time, but one in which I think we can actually thrive. That's my 8 minutes. I'm handing over to Ian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Briefly, I know Ian said I can't introduce him starting from when he was a kid. for us here in Australia who are fascinated with rivers, I think Ian would not need a long introduction for most of us. Professor Ian Rutherford is a renowned expert in fluvial geomorphology and river restoration. With decades of research and real-world impact, Ian has shaped environmental policy, waterway rehabilitation, and strategies to improve river health across Australia and Asia. So privileged to hand over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Eva. Thanks for having me. So I'm providing some, I'll just check, can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
I'm talking about some context today, and I'm really following on from what Stuart said. I'm talking about motivation. So we have here the COP15 targets that Stuart mentioned. We've got 5 years, everybody, 5 years to achieve these targets. Target 1, inclusive spatial planning, management processes. Target 2, 30% of areas degraded under effective restoration. And I'm just putting on my timer here. And target 3 is the 30% of inland waters protected. So these are very challenging targets. When you see those, I think 3 things. 1 is fantastic, as Stuart says, we've got global targets to drive this restoration program. 2nd, how are we going to measure these? And 3rd, what motivates us and everyone to achieve them? So the first is the measurement thing. Now, this is extremely complicated. How do you measure restoration and protection of waterways when you've got linear systems, you've got catchment areas? And I was going to talk about that, but I'm not going to, because good news is we've got this report, Pathway for Inland Waters. I'd recommend this one to you. It goes into detail on how to actually think about this. I'd also draw your attention to the authors and sponsors of this program. I think this is a critical point. The powerful contribution of not-for-profit entities in this space. It's not governments that are driving a lot of this stuff. It's these not-for-profit groups that are thinking about it and making it real. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. Let's talk about motivation. Now, Stuart mentioned the Freshwater Challenge, and the American contribution to that, if you didn't know, was the America the Beautiful program. Biden and Harris committed to reconnecting, restoring and protecting 8 million acres of wetlands, 100,000 miles of rivers and streams by 2030. Now, you may not recognise those units of measurement, but they are substantial. And if you go to the website now to explore more about the beautiful program, this is what you discover. It's gone. So we know, and Stuart has made this point, this is a deeply political topic. Rivers touch on every aspect of communities, both biological as well as social, economic, cultural. So this is a deeply political topic, and that drives the motivation. So I'm going to talk about motivations for protection, for restoration, and then talk about some big scale changes that are happening. First, protection. This is a map that shows the undammed proportion of the rivers of the world. 37% remain free-flowing. Now, international rivers have prevented, delayed or stopped 217 dams. Now, that is river restoration in action, protecting the last waterways. Well, what was their motivation for doing that? There were myriad motivations. Cultural for Indigenous communities, protecting and threatened species, highlighting bad economics around dams and so on. There were all sorts of motivations for doing that, but protection is possibly the most important thing. And interestingly, it doesn't really get recorded in the COP15 targets because we're just protecting systems that are already there. You don't get the recognition for doing it. Equally, they've also supported 277 grassroots organisations across the world. Now, governments are both involved in degrading waterways but also protecting them. They have a fundamental regulatory role in our streams and rivers, and what motivates them? We need to understand that. Restoration. Now, today we're going to hear from Karen, Bart and Siobhan talking about restoration networks and global efforts in this remarkable area. I can remember we've really moved from a cottage industry for restoration back when I started, and many of you started, to now a global influential program which is changing the planet. So what's the motivation for that? Well, we all know it's love of rivers, but it's more than that. It's also about love. It's about relationships. It's about changing what we're doing with communities, and that motivates us all to do this amazing work. But I would love to see, and this is a suggestion, that every restoration community, and there's many of you on this call, or network in a rich country could pair with a catchment or community in a low-income country to protect high-value systems there. Now, the reason I mention that is because protection is so important, and if we're going to hit these COP15 targets, how are we going to get there? So my mantra is we must restore where we are, but protect where we can. We can do both things. Now, I'm going to move to something, a larger scale topic now, which is motivation for mutual benefits. So we all know that natural inland waters provide irreplaceable ecosystem services: drinking, irrigation water, food security, flood, drought risk reduction, pollution control, carbon sequestration, fisheries. We all know that, and yet despite knowing that synergy, we still have this decline in biodiversity, which is reaching a crisis. Why is that? It's because you can achieve these human benefits independent in a lot of ways of these biodiversity benefits. You don't have to protect biodiversity to get these services, but we all want to. So what's changed, though, in the last 20 years is we've seen a massive change in what I would call national scale top-down programs, which are motivated by biodiversity, but also by broader goals that we're all talking about, broader human ecosystem service goals. We can name many of them. Here's some examples: the European Framework Directive, European River Restoration Centre, India's National River Conservation Plan, which is motivated by water quality improvements in their culturally critical rivers. Kenya's programs around water management are about improving catchment health to improve potable water supply to cities. We've got the Murray-Darling Basin, which is the product of a crisis in water management that's led to all sorts of things. I want to talk about one thing now, which is China's ecological civilization policy. And Professor Feng Guanshu is going to talk about this in more depth. But I want to mention this because this is the largest restoration program on Earth. And what motivates it? Why is it changed? And I mention it because the motivations for this program are very similar in other parts of the world. We've got crises of pollution, flooding and drought. We've reached in China the limits often of exploitation of these systems. They've recognised that the economic development of the country is dependent on natural capital. There's also a burgeoning middle class who are demanding a better quality of life. We've done all this economic development and look at the crap river we live next to, that sort of story. Now, the ecological civilization story is deeply entwined with culture and with ideas of harmony and with politics. It's fundamentally political. I mention this because the characteristics of this program are reflected in a lot of places in the world and driving fundamental change. So in South West Queensland, we see the Resilient Rivers program. There were some people today on this one. 11 councils responding to massive flooding along the eastern seaboard, recognising that drinking water, food production, ecological health are entwined, and we're not going to solve those without collaboration and coordination. Now, it's not always true, though, that working for human benefits and synergistic human benefits lead to biodiversity priorities. And urban stream restoration is a good example of this. Now, we can restore urban streams. That's great for amenity, all sorts of good reasons to do it, but it's not really contributing fundamentally to biodiversity. So let me conclude. Suggestion 2. To hit the COP15 challenging and exciting targets, we must fight to protect what remains. And we must continue to fight for proper recognition, regulation and funding of waterway protection and restoration. And that's what many of you in this enterprise are doing. However, relying on the nobility of biodiversity as a motivator has not worked. At the 11th hour, though, there seems to be some convergence between biodiversity goals and human motivations around ecosystem services. And Stuart talked about the really critical economic drivers that are emerging around this. And so we need to hit those to have any hope of achieving our COP15 targets, and we must engage with multiple motivations of powerful players and get what biodiversity benefits we can. Now, finally, not everybody's got different views on what happens for the future. Some believe that the future of humanity is in the stars. Well, the good news is we're finding lots of rivers on Mars, and they're 3.7 billion years old. And I think some people maybe should go and restore those rivers. But I think the rest of us should stay here on Earth and engage with this amazing opportunity that's emerging around river restoration. Thank you very much.
Is that amazing? Ian, I'm still laughing. I think what we might see if we could plan a field trip to Mars as part of the International River Symposium, Jode, that would probably entice people to attend International River Symposium. But the two context speakers we have are truly inspirational. You actually have me just at the edge of my seat, just listening to both of you. Your passion, your challenges, your comments to all of us, I think really, really is very inspiring. But now I will encourage the participants, if you have any questions to or Ian, if you could put it on the chat box. I probably would start with a few ones that I've got in my pocket here, unless somebody has one hot off the press one. I think so I might start, if that's okay. I think the driver, as you said, you've highlighted biodiversity as a major driver, and I still remember, I think you both know Professor Stuart Bunn. And Stuart, I remembered Stuart's then that Eva, the next war will not be a war on water, it will be a biodiversity crisis, which basically you both have highlighted. But as your stories have shown, the journey of river restoration just based on biodiversity is probably not sufficient. And I think it would be good if both of you could expand more about the role of engaging the corporates. Corporates, number one, and the next one, as you said, the human nature of people, the social implications of restoration and protection. So maybe I'll start with you, Stuart, in terms of how do we get the corporates as excited as we are in terms of restoration?
Sure. So I totally agree with you that I think Ian and I both sort of nailed home the point that biodiversity is in crisis and it matters to all of us, and that's super important. But when we think about our work in restoration, the first question that comes to our mind is, what societal and economic problem are we trying to solve? Because if we don't lead with that, we're not going to solve the problem of restoring this river, because we won't get the money, we won't get the incentives, we won't get the political support. And so I think it has become very obvious that we need to make it third, fourth, fifth, or even 10th thing in line when we talk about why we're doing something, okay? Not always, but most of the time. And we just have to be very smart about that. And we have to be smart about that when we're putting together proper economics, appealing to people. And to your point, why is the private sector involved or interested in anything to do with water? It's because water is a material risk to their business, whether that is flooding out their factories or drying out their fields. They have, for the last 15 or 20 years, really felt the impact of water crises in their supply chains. I won't say, though, Ava, that I think that they've acted, brilliantly and risen to the challenge. I think that we've got massive issues with the way in which corporations are dealing with water. We still are suffering from heavily polluted waterways from industries, et cetera. So I don't want to oversell the point. But what I think is interesting is that the increasingly, as climate change is becoming a lot more acute and people are putting two and two together, finally, that is becoming a bigger issue. And so their interest in restoration is certainly there within the sort of political frameworks. I'm not seeing yet the kind of financial move into those projects, maybe at a small scale, but maybe not at the big scale. But I think it's inevitable, whether it's the private sector or private finance, or whether it's asset classes or insurance sectors, or even municipal budgets. People are going to be motivated to invest upstream and downstream because they know it's in their best long-term interest, as the example that Ian gave from, for example, the Resilient Rivers program in Australia. What were the incentives? Well, cities didn't want to get flooded. So I think that we're going to get there. I just think that we as a community need to be very smart about the language we use and the incentives we create.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Ian, over
thanks,
to you.
Stuart. Yeah, there are really two reasons why a corporation would get involved in this space. One is reputation, and the other is risk, as Stuart said. The reputation side is that we can all see this for corporate boards improving their reputation by investing in this sort of space, and that's real, and it's motivated by goodwill, but it's also dangerous. We all know about the greenwashing challenges and the responsibilities are real, and until recently, until I suppose the political changes that are emerging at the moment, the ESG motivator was a really strong one. The second reason is risk. As Stuart said, and that's risk around, if you own a dam, it's around water supply. It's around the water quality that underpins your business interests. One of the problems, of course, is, and this is the point I was making before, there are ways to manage those risks without getting public biodiversity benefits. And so to force, in a sense, the corporations to engage and fund real change, which is one of the underpinning ideas of the COP15 process. The expectation is we're going to have billions of dollars worth of private investment, and it's the markets are merging at the moment, but they're very vestigial, and so we really haven't seen it come out. And I think that people in Australia, particularly, are getting a bit more pessimistic about the opportunities for floods of money to come, because the externality prices of private activity simply aren't costed appropriately.
Yep. And I know we could probably talk about this forever, because there's also other levers that we talked about, for example, the design side of things. When can we bring the corporates in, but at the same time, as you said, multiple objectives. But in saying that, what we might do is move on, because Ian, you've showcased the role of the human dimension of river restoration in terms of the community groups like the river restoration networks, and how we could escalate that and highlight that more. And so it is my pleasure to present Bart to give an introduction of the different restoration networks that we have the privilege of having here join us today. Bart is a stranger to the International River Federation. He's a longtime friend. Bart is a co-founder, and for 10 years, the chair of the European Centre for Restoration. As I said, a long-standing friend of the IRF. Bart has been instrumental in connecting experts, organizations, and communities across borders to drive global river restoration efforts. That's just a very short version snippet of who Bart is. Thank you, Bart.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eva, and good day, everyone. I will briefly introduce you the River Restorations Network, and I concentrate on what they do. This is based on the three existing major networks that are working together and presenting themselves together today here in this event. And that concerns the Asian River Restoration Network, the Australian River Restoration Centre, and the European Centre for River Restoration. The organizational setup is rather different, but their work has much in common, and that's why I present them as a whole in this presentation. Could I have the next slide, please? Oh, no, that one is okay. River restoration started in the 90s by pioneering conservationists. This was followed by in the 90s with focus on ecology and morphology, and this has led to much and up till today still ongoing research. But the river restoration people came together already in the European Centre for River Restoration in Europe, and they came together especially in 2008 with the 4th International River Restoration Conference. This was in Finnish with 350 participants from all over the world. It was really an international conference. The names you see, they were all there. However, we were also there, and when I say we were there, these were the people from the three networks, because they were already by then all the three in place. The proceedings, I had a look at them yesterday, they have 1,000 pages. And this 1,000 pages learned quite a lot about the state of the art of river restoration by then, but the conclusion was that there should be from then on more emphasis on implementation and best practices of river restoration. But then we are talking about almost 20 years ago, and of course there has much happened in these 20 years. The next slide, please. The River Restoration Network love people. They consist of people, and they love bringing people together around rivers. It has been said before today already. Networks are independent, impartial, and enthusiastic. This is important because there are many stakeholders who have some interest, also organizational, personal interest, but networks, they represent the interest of others. They are, on one hand, oriented on hydroecological and geomorphological processes because that's where it's all about, but they also like knowledge, fact, figures, biodiversity, water quality, cost, and benefits. So it's very broad where networks are dealing with. And more, they concentrate also on the social aspect of river restoration. And this is, of course, also to do with climate change. The focus is on best practices and showcasing studies because this is very effective. And they need, of course, an audience to communicate. And then the next slide, please. River restoration policy, strategies, and concepts are very important because river restoration is very varied and this need to be streamlined in some way. So we always emphasize in certain countries, also still in Europe, start with good policies, develop a strategy, and use the concepts that are available. This is important before you can come to a practical implementation. And we heard already again this morning, this is very much needed. Networks bring policymakers and planners together around case studies and fieldworks. This is very helpful because seeing is believing. Next slide, please. The communication, that's one of the main tasks of the networks, of course. Providing a river restoration network needs a communication infrastructure. Communication on river restoration needs relevant information, and then information needs to be collected. And finally, the information needs to be brought to the user. Most effective is what we learned, is the direct personal experience in this sharing between people. Community of practices therefore have a high added value, and for all of these networks need resources. If the resources are not there, then it's very difficult to work, and I must admit that it's rather difficult to get these resources for the networks because they are not directly implementing river restoration, they are somewhere intermediate. And people who fund this type of actions, they always want direct impact. I think we have quite a lot of direct impact, but it's difficult to show this. Our reputation, next slide, please. River restoration networks have been there now for 20 to 25 years across Asia, Australia, and Greater Europe. As I said, we are trusted advisors and facilitators to national and international governments and organizations. We are all the three vital networks, but our real power depends on our network supporters, subscribers, and members. And they are mostly also our audience, users, and clients. And that makes it sometimes a little bit difficult, but it means that at the end, it's up to the users and the clients and the audience how powerful we are. We do our best, but they need to continue with what we started. The next slide, please. Then the network coming to an end. It's my pleasure to announce and to introduce briefly the three mentioned networks. They will present themselves with some specific presentations, but it's the Asian River Restoration Network for Korea, Japan, and China, established in 2006. Professor Dr. Fengran, he will give a presentation. He's from the Institute for Water Resources and Hydropower Research, and the Asian network was started in 2006. Then the Australian River Restoration Centre for Australia, of course, Dr. Sivan Lovett Seaville is the director. The centre started in 2006, and she will present as a CEO the Australian River Restoration Centre. And then the European Centre for River Restoration in Europe, the Dr. Karin Olsen, project manager for the LIFE project Connects and Aquatic Life from the country administrative board of Skåne, Sweden, will give a presentation on some real implementation project. That needs a little bit of an explanation. The Swedish Environment Agency is a member of the ECRR, like many other national organizations are member of an ECRR. ECRR advised the Swedish government and the agency on their renewed restoration strategy a few years ago. This means that Karen, as a project manager, is now implementing ECRR advices. There's a long way in between, and the long way what's in between is what I just presented to you. That is the communication and everything what is related. I'd like to ask you attention now for the network for their advices on the fast tracking solutions for reviving rivers. And Mr. Van Gran Chu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Bart. And hello, my distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am Feng from ARN. My presentation is on the river restoration practices of China. Please, next slide. Please, yeah. I want to introduce two cases from the Mother River Revival action. This action was implemented by Ministry of Water Resources of China in the recent 3 years. The first is the Yongding River. It flows through 5 provinces. It is a mother river of Beijing with a drainage area of 47,000 square kilometers, and it has problems of water scarcity, water pollution, and ecological degradation. A key restoration approach is to make a unified regulation and eco-friendly water network of the 5 provinces and the River Basin Agency and the investment companies. And another approach is to establish a system of rigid constraints on water use. And the third is replenishing water to the river and restore the wetland. And the fourth is a transformation from government-led to diversified co-governance. And the last approach is to develop digital twins and intelligent system for the multi-purposes regulation. And the result, as a result, we have a flowing river, green river, and clean river. The entire river channel was connected after being cut off for 26 years. And the forest coverage and the biodiversity had increased, and the water quality are getting better. Next, please. The second case is the Beijing-Hangzhou Grand Canal. It has a total length of nearly 1,800 kilometers. It's a World Cultural Heritage. It has functions of flood control and drainage, water supply, inland transportation, and landscape. In the north section part of the canal, it had problems like the channel cut off for over 100 years and over exploitation of groundwater and ecological damage and pollution. And the approaches are to replenishing water and clear out the obstructing facilities and divert water to replace the groundwater use and irrigate the farmland. The next, please. Since the 2022, the continuous water has flowed for 3 consecutive years, and the water space was increased. The water quality and the biodiversity index were improved. The groundwater level rose, and it had become a cultural corridor that connects the historical relics and folk customs and cultural heritage. Next, the concepts used to guide these practices include the ecological civilization and the comprehensive management of mountain, water, forest, farmland, lake, grass, sand, and happiness of river and lake, and also the river ethics, viewing the natural river as life beings and achieve the harmonious coexistence between human and rivers, and strengthen the human responsibilities and protect the rights of rivers. Next. And for the future challenges and opportunities, the first is to develop a restoration strategy resilient for the extreme events. And the second, in the faster changing environments, for example, the urbanization or the water resources projects on the river, and the relatively longer evolvement of the ecosystem, it is a challenge to determine a reasonable restoration goal for the action. And the third is it is needed for the carefully planned ecosystem restoration based on ecological principles, not just the attached effects of other measures. And the fourth is needed for the solutions for limited space of urban rivers, especially for the old cities or old towns. The last is to achieve value of aquatic ecological products. This can make the restoration projects more sustainable and make the cost be compensated, and to make to have more benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Fan. We probably have a minute for, and there's a question here from Ian, which I will raise. So the Fangran, the Yangtze River is the first in China to be given rights as an entity. When will be the practical effects of this important change for the Yangtze River?
For the Yangtze River, there is a strategy for the protection of the whole river basin and the ban, the prohibit of the fishing in the river. And this is happening in the recent years. And there is a law, is the first law for a river, the Yangtze River law had been issued in China.
And so I know for the tools that you've done, you've put in the studies and you've seen amazing impact already. Are you seeing impacts for the Yangtze now in terms of the investment by government towards, let's say, the Yangtze River Conservancy Commission or Yangtze River Commission? Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is implemented. I think not only the Yangtze River Commission, it also the provinces, almost a dozen the provinces of the along the river. It's a systematical plan that there has a plan, and the effects may take maybe longer time to
Yes.
come into practice.
Yes, thanks, Van Graan. And I understand
Thank you.
Dr. Bain, the Director General, is also here listening to this conversation, which is really good. I think what Van Graan has highlighted to us, and I think Ian also raised this, these massive restoration projects, as in massive restoration projects they are doing in China. And Van Graan has highlighted the transition of exclusive governance, as in, political governance, to co-governance, which hopefully we'll learn more about later on in the Q&A. But Van Graan, you have given us some amazing examples of case studies, as well as the impact at River Restoration Network, but alluded to, you have really accomplished a fair bit. We would love to hear some more. And by the way, Van Graan and the ARRN will hopefully bring along a delegation to the International River Symposium in September. Thank you, Van Graan, and thank you, Professor Bain. With that, I will now do a trip from Asia. We come to Australia, and privileged to introduce Dr. Shuan Lovett. Over to Shuan.
Thanks so much, Eva, and what amazing pictures there, Van Graan. Thank you very much for sharing. So, let's now look at Australia. So I started off this talk approaching it a little differently. I actually wanted to reflect on the experience I have had, and came across this quote which was saying, we don't learn from the experience, it's only when we reflect on it that we learn. And reflecting on my experience, I'd just like to shout out Bart, Martin and Ian, who have been mentors of mine and are very good friends, and Bart and I caught up for coffee last year in Amsterdam, but they really have been stalwart supporters of the work of the Australian River Restoration Centre and of me in establishing quite a different approach to rivers and people. So I've focused on 3 areas that I think we can learn from based on our experience of restoring rivers in Australia over the last few decades. The first one for me is that as a social scientist, I think it's essential that we look at the wider context within which we are working on our rivers. And right now, when you talk to young people, and some of the stats are pretty awful, 46% of them actually have real fears about the state of the planet, and they're very worried. So eco-anxiety is a real feature. When I was growing up, it was a threat of Cold War. These days, it's actually eco-anxiety. So you might be thinking, how does that relate to river restoration? Well, it relates directly, because when you're looking at a site like this and you can see the river restoration work that's gone on here, what we're actually talking about here is river restoration as a leading nature-based solution to effectively combating climate change impacts. When you start to turn the conversation to something that's active, to something that gives people confidence that we are doing something, and when you can show them a stretch of river like this one, and they can see those plants grow, you can see that that stretch of river is going to be a refuge in a climate-impacted world. And this completely changes the conversation for people. It is real climate change, but we can do something about it. So yes, think globally, but acting locally is how you engage people and retain that sense of hope rather than despair. So whether it's planting trees, as this university group are doing, putting in fish hotels for trout cod and Murray cod, and you see in the background that this area has been very badly burnt, so there's no natural snags left in the stream. So we're actually putting in what we call fish hotels. Whether it's out on the riverbank, these people are adventure volunteers. They've been trained to actually access riverbanks that you can't get to by car, putting in long stem tube stock. All of these are ways of engaging people. And one of our really important initiatives is to invest in our social capital. And this is our mentoring program. So in the bottom right-hand part of the screen, I've put there just the logos for the different programs that we work on. This is a program where we bring together people who've been working in the waterway industry for many years, together with someone who is new and emerging. They work together on a waterway project for a year, and we form this very strong community. And this community continues to interact and share information long after the mentoring program's finished. So that's my first area of activity, really from experience, placing river restoration within the context of someone's life and then supporting the social capital that actually bolsters all of us in our work is absolutely essential. The second area for Australia, and with this absolutely gorgeous photo here of the Great Kumbung Swamp, is that environmental water has been a game changer for river restoration efforts in Australia. Since the 2000s, we've actually we have specific holdings, environmental water holdings, that we're able to use to mimic natural flow patterns, to piggyback on the back of floods, and really focus on those ecosystems that are in crisis, as Philip showed us earlier with those awful stats about freshwater ecosystems. So what we're doing here is really assisting with the communication. So this is a picture of the Murray-Darling Basin here, and we can see here a number of different aquatic system types: estuaries, floodplains, lakes, wetlands and rivers. These are all hotspots for biodiversity. What I'm showing here now is Commonwealth environmental water just for the 22 to 23 water year. And you can see here that we've delivered water pretty much along those fabulous big veins that you can see under the aquatic system types in the figure on the left. What does this actually mean? Well, it means that in 22 to 23, our environmental water supported 83% of ecosystem types, including 64% of lake and wetland diversity, those powerhouses of biodiversity, and 14% of the total areas of lakes and wetlands on the managed floodplain. The managed floodplain refers to that part of the floodplain we can actually reach. There's a lot of floodplain areas we can't reach. Let's now look at our 8 Ramsar events. So responding to that global, to those international conventions, we delivered gigalitres, 437 gigalitres to 8 Ramsar sites, ensuring that they're supporting those critical components and processes for which they're known. We can even go down to the species level. And so we're looking here at lignum, which is a big bushy shrub, and again, a powerhouse for not only nesting habitat, but also for food and nutrient. 13,000 hectares were supported just in 1 year using environmental water. So whether it's supporting fish like this big Murray cod that we got caught a couple of weeks ago, don't worry, we kissed him and put him back, or it's supporting ibis bird breeding events, or what's really important is also looking at not just the critters, but looking at this stunning environment here where we're supporting non-woody and woody vegetation. You can see those beautiful aquatic plants there. And if you're interested in learning more about this, I've put the link there. Flow monitoring, evaluation and research is the place to go to learn more about what we're doing there. It's a really exciting space. The final area I wanted to talk about was advocacy. So rivers do need a voice, but it's a different type of advocacy. And as a not-for-profit organisation, we've been able to bring people together with an approach that focuses on solutions rather than blame, collaboration instead of competition, and dialogue over dispute. This is the Upper Murrumbidgee River in 2019, where it actually ran dry. This is a pretty outstanding and incredible and awful thing to have happened, given that this is Australia's 3rd largest river, and it used to be a very, very mighty river. It started up in the Snowy Mountains, and what's particularly important about this picture is that you can see the electricity cables in the back, because we have the very large Snowy Mountain hydroelectric scheme up in this part of the world. The Upper Murrumbidgee River, unfortunately in the 1960s, well, fortunately for the irrigators and all the other water supplies that it provides, Tantangara Dam was built, and this is a very old-fashioned dam now. It has no offtakes apart from one very small one down the bottom, and it was built to trap as much water as possible. So the Upper Murrumbidgee River, which you can see here, there's Tantangara Dam and there's Burrinjuck. This river is now really parched. It's a 300-kilometre stretch of river that receives less than 5% of its flow. So you can imagine the massive impact that that has had on the river. We were very concerned about this, and a number of people have raised concerns over the years, but it wasn't until we brought together people under a common banner, the Forgotten River, that actually got action. We timed our work really well. We put together the science. There's no point throwing science into a policy environment unless they're ready for you. We got together the science, we got together the community, and then we worked out how we were going to work as a collaborative group to effect political change. And so we went straight to the top. And back in the 29th of November 2023, this man here is an independent senator for the Australian Capital Territory. He just so happened to hold the important vote that would allow the Labor Party to get an act over the line. So he negotiated, and his negotiation was to raise $50 million for this stretch of river. That sounds like a big number. 30 million of it was actually to buy water if we needed to, but 21 million is indeed going to support the health of the river, which is absolutely fantastic. But we wanted to do more than that. We wanted to actually change how the Snowy Hydroelectric Commission runs that river, which basically at the moment it just stops water going down it. And so this year, just a few months ago, we met with Katie Gallagher out on the river. She is the Minister for Finance in Australia and a shareholder in the Snowy Hydroelectric Commission, and she was able to trigger the review of a very significant piece of legislation called the Snowy Water Outcomes Implementation Deed, or the SWIOID, and that is going to really set the cat amongst the pigeons, but it's about time that it did, so that this river actually gets the water that it deserves. The real take home here is that those people there, we don't all believe the same thing. We all represent different groups, whether it's Indigenous groups, whether it's landholders, whether it's irrigators or conservationists, but we all came together around this campaign because we all cared about the Forgotten River. And that includes the Snowy Hydroelectric Commission. So they were very much working with us and alongside us. Basically because they had to, because we invited them. We didn't blame them, we invited them to be part of the solution. And that's really my last message to you all, that we need to be involving people in the problem and immerse them so that they feel and soak it in, but that they're part of the solution. Invite them to be there right beside you. And so all our work at the Australian River Restoration Centre is based on the premise that alone we can do a little, but together we can do a lot. Thanks.
That's Siobhan. I love that. Alone we can do a little, but together we can do a lot. Sorry, Bart, did you have a question, Bart?
No.
Oh, you love that quote too. Thanks, Siobhan.
Very much.
Yeah, the inspiring work that your group does and you basically leading it. I think, Siobhan, it would be good if you could expand a little bit on getting, as you said, they've different objectives or different, individual objectives, but especially getting the politicians on board. We'll talk about river restoration.
It was very much about waiting until they were ready. There's no point pushing something and saying something is dire when they're dealing with something else. So for us, with David Pocock, he swims in the river every Friday morning. So we knew that was already an in for him. He loved the Upper Murrumbidgee, and so he wanted something to happen. And it was giving him the information that he could then feed in, whether it was a letter to the minister, whether it was talking to a particular group. They would get in touch with us and say, okay, what are the facts that we need here? And then they would deliver it. With Katie Gallagher, it was really looking at the fact we've got an election coming up. This deed review is going to be very unpalatable. So why not do it right before an election? If she gets in, she is going to have to honour it, which is fine. I think she wants to. But if she doesn't, then it becomes a problem for the next government. So we're at the moment really trying to raise awareness on both sides of politics that deed review needs to happen. So I just feel that often, because we are so passionate about rivers and we care about them so much, we want to tell people, and we don't understand when they don't necessarily take it on. But if we actually take the time to get to know that person, get to know the issues, get to know where they're at, then we can slot in our evidence and our passion at a time when it's right for them.
Thanks, Siobhan. I'm pretty sure there will be more questions and more interaction that we will do in relation to that, as you said, campaign. And putting rivers, I think it was Ian who said that, putting the rivers in the political agenda and the ways to do that. We could learn, for example, from the Asia River Restoration Network and how they've done that for the Yangtze, that massive restoration work that they've done. Thank you again. I love that the message of having that human aspect of river restoration. Thank you very much. Very inspirational. With that, I would like to hand over to Karen Olsen, who will now talk to us about the European Centre for River Restoration work they do there. Thanks, Tara, and welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
We can hear you.
Yes, great. Hello, my name is Karin Olsson, and I will tell you a little about how we work with networking and motivation for restoration. Good words to have when you talk to others. So thank you for that, Ian and Stuart. I will talk a little bit about how we work with networking, and River Restoration Center is one of the platforms to use for networking. But I will also tell you about how we use European funding in a program called LIFE for doing restorations in Sweden. So I call it LIFE for Resilient Waters in Sweden, and I will show you some examples. Next, please. I will tell you about two projects that I am project managing for, and it's in the southern parts of Sweden. Sweden are not that big if you compare to Australia that Sivan just talked about, but still we work with the same issues, and we have to do more or less in the same way. As Sivan told us about different type of projects to motivate and get restoration doing. We are actually doing the same in Sweden with these LIFE projects that I would say boost the river restorations in Sweden really a lot. Next, please. And we have the same problems. Why are we doing restorations? What are the motivation for restoration? And if you look at the map, that's the dams in Sweden that we know about. There are certainly several more dams that we have to restore. And as you can see in the pictures, there are very small ones, but they are still barriers for fish migration and for transport of sediments and the natural processes in the water. So you have to work with also these really small ones, which we are doing in the projects. Next one, please. But we also have this larger one. So if you go, yes, in the one of the projects, we have a hydropower company as a partner in the project, and they actually in 2020 removed one of their hydropower plants. And a lot of people ask me, how did you get them to be part of it? What was the motivation? Well, we have a legislation in Europe and the Water Framework Directive that says we have had to have good status when it comes to connectivity. And this one is the first one from the sea. So it was a really good value for nature. And the company had to do some, the power plant was quite old, so they did have to do a lot of stuff to get it going. So they actually chose to take it away instead. So that was a really nice work, and we can talk to other hydropower companies to show this, that they can do something. Of course, they will not do it everywhere because they earn money on the hydropower, but in some places that are really high value for nature. So we can take next one. But I always say when I talk about river restoration, it doesn't matter if you take away the dams, if you have an impact on the rivers upstreams. If you don't have any spawning areas for fish or so, then it doesn't matter if you open up the river. So we work a lot with habitat restoration upstreams where we take away the dams, because we need to have back the natural processing in the rivers and the natural spawning and habitats for different species. Otherwise, the restoration by dam removals will not have the same effect. Next, please. But also, not only the longitudinal connectivity is important, you have to work with the whole catchment area to see what what problem do we have? In Sweden, we have been quite good before with a lot of water, not so many problems with drought and flooding, but now we start to have that due to climate change. So we have to start to work also with the lateral connectivity to give water space, to give back the space that they used to have. So we also work with restoring wetlands, lowered lakes, re-wet areas that have been drained. So this is also really important to look at the whole picture and restore not only one problem, but try to get this multifunctional restoration where you look at the whole catchment area, all the problems, and see what can you do to get the most benefit from the restoration. Next, please. And through this big project, we have learned a lot of lessons, I would say, because there are a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities when you work with this big project. As we heard, to get people involved is really important to be able to have these larger projects. So it's really important to anchor the restoration measure early on with landowners and other stakeholders, because otherwise you will not succeed. And when you start build a robust organization and get these networks going, because when you have these engaged and committed partners, you have a lot easier to actually get the restoration done. But also, I would say to have competent consultants and contractors doing the work out in the river is also really important to get a good result. And one of the lessons I have learned, that is, we in Sweden have a lot of legislation on what you can do in the water, and permits and licenses takes a lot of time. In one of the projects, we are on our third year to get permit to get rid of a dam. So we have been in the court for 3 years to get this dam removed, and hopefully we will get it this year. And in some of the problem in the court is that we have contradicting legislations and strategies that can complicate the implementation of the restoration measure. For example, some places we have cultural values that will be preserved, and still they are a barrier for migration. It can be a definite barrier. So how do we get free-flowing rivers and at the same time preserve these cultural values? I think we have to look again at the whole picture in the watershed to get the best solutions. And integration is an important part and still a challenge. So if you go to the next one. So in these life projects, a big part is also connecting people to promote further restorations. So we work a lot with walks and talks, school activities. So we try to educate both adults and children on why restoration is so important. What are the values and the motivations to get restoration of our rivers? So with that, I would say networking is really important to get the motivation and show the whole picture on why river restoration is so important will make further restorations possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. There's been a comment presentation that you have and really talking about integration and networking as critical. I probably have a minute to ask a question, and you've highlighted as one of the critical groups that need to be reached out to is the media. Would you be able to share some experience in dealing with the media? and getting them
Well,
engaged and
yeah,
excited.
yes, yes, I can give a quite good example. When you remove dams, you often have the people living around it saying, well, you can't take away this water because this is our lake. And it's like, no, it's not a lake, it's a dam. And media can be really important in how the community will react. If you get the media to understand why is it important to remove this, the community will start to realize why it's important. But if the media interview only the stakeholders that are against the removal, you will have a hard time working with it. We had that in one of the rivers, and they actually started a group called the Friends of the River, but they wanted to keep all the dams. So for us, it was like, no, you are not Friends of the River, but their media had a really important part in the beginning of when we started to talk about removing the dams. Now, almost 10 years later, we will remove 5 of the dams. So it have taken a while, and media had a huge part in making it more difficult to reach agreement between the community and the people living around the river.
And there's a follow-up to that in terms of the dam removal. There's a question from Christine here, which is asking, have you seen positive responses in that restoration process in terms of aquatic life?
Yes, we follow up all larger removals, of course, to see the effects, and sometimes even the smaller ones. And one of our entrepreneurs, he tells us, well, when it takes away the last piece of the dam, he can see sea trout and other fish go up directly. So you can see the effects immediately in many places, but of course we have fish counters and other stuff to be able to see in the long run what the effects are. And we can see that you have an increase recreation. A lot of people use these areas for recreation when it have become more natural and yeah, gone back to what it was before.
Thank you, Karen. Flow through into the human dimension, which is fascinating. Thank you, Karen. Karen's actually the third of our presenters, the third of the networks. And we will get the networks back again later on. So if you have still any questions to any of the 3 networks, also and to Stuart and to Ian, by all means, use the chat box, and we will get through your questions. And if we can't, then we will write it into a newsletter, get the responses, and send them to you. So we are now in our last session, which is the reactor panel session. And the purpose of a reactor panel is really to give more insights on the theme from different perspectives. And we are quite fortunate to have 4 different perspectives today that will share their experiences, but more insights. And I'll only introduce them in very short terms, because only from a perspective level, because they will be talking about their organization and the work they do in terms of river restoration as well. So we have 4. We have Martin James, who loves working to restore and enhance our rivers, is what Martin's LinkedIn byline says. And Martin will talk a bit more from a river practitioner perspective, basically a river restoration network. Then we have Dr. Joe Burton, the director of SEQ Resilient Rivers Initiative. And Joe loves translating cutting-edge science to policy and real-world solutions. So Joe will be taking the governance perspective. Then we have Salvador Rico, a passionate Rotarian from Ukiah, California, an advocate for cleaning the rivers of the world. And this is then Salvador will be talking from a civic service organization perspective. And last but not the least, we have the 3-time Olympian, 3-time World Cup champion in whitewater canoe slalom. And that's no other than Scott Shipley. Scott will also talk about it from a business perspective, but definitely from a kayaker, Scott. That's what we would like to hear from you. With that, can I please get all of the 4 spotlighted? Why? So the process here is no presentations. I will throw questions. The audience, by all means, put questions on the chat box. But I will start with the first lot of questions, which really relates to 2 things. If you can introduce yourself, your organization, and in a sentence, explain how your organization is related or is working in relation to river restoration. I will start with Martin.
Thanks, Eva. So yeah, my name's Martin James. I head up the UK's River Restoration Centre. So our organisation is really promoting the benefits of working with natural processes for river ecosystems. We advise and support the UK river restoration community, and that's regulators, NGOs, contractors, consultants, and practitioners and researchers. So it's trying to pull everyone together, give them a sense of community, a community that's really growing, and to make sure that we can share that. Also, my other kind of side job is chair of the European Centre for River Restoration, which Bart has already introduced. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I will hand over to Jo Burton.
Thanks, Eva. So I'm the director of the Resilient Rivers Southeast Queensland, which is an initiative of the Council of Mayors Southeast Queensland. The Council of Mayors brings together the mayors of 11 councils across the region, and our member councils work together to tackle the region's biggest challenges and leverage opportunities to ensure that we continue to have a great place to live. Southeast Queensland's the fastest growing region in Australia, so the pressures of population growth and climate change make river resilience one of the biggest challenges that we need to tackle. So Resilient Rivers itself was established by the Council of Mayors following significant floods in 2011 and 2013, which threatened the water security of Queensland's capital city, Brisbane. So there was true recognition that catchments don't abide by local government boundaries and that upstream catchments provide critical ecosystem services, in this case drinking water, to cities downstream. And so this recognition justified the Resilient Rivers approach, where local governments downstream can justify investing money in local government areas upstream to provide these critical services.
Thank you. Salvador.
Hello, everybody. My name is Salvador Rico from Ukiah, California. I'm a Rotarian, and I've been working on doing river cleanups and restorations in the volunteer side with Rotary clubs, connecting with different NGOs where we live. Started here in Ukiah, California on my very first river cleanup in 2009. And since then, we've been sharing that idea to restore and clean up rivers with Rotary clubs around the globe. Currently, we have an initiative, a partnership that we formed with the United Nations Environment Program and Rotary International. This initiative is called Community Action for Fresh Water, following along the idea to adopt a river. And so we have over 150 Rotary clubs in different countries doing activities and partnering with different NGOs in their communities to restore the rivers, to clean up the rivers, the lakes, the wetlands, and watersheds. So it is a constant work, and I continue to promote it and growing more and more as the time goes.
Thanks, Salvador. I'll head over to Scott.
Thanks. I'm Scott Shipley. I'm with Caliber Engineering, and we're a river engineering firm focused primarily on river restoration, river engineering, with a real focus on how humans interact with water and whitewater. So everything from whitewater parks to river trips and river access, and as well as developing areas, streamside areas, and helping to transition some locations from industrial, dammed rivers to free-flowing, active tourist destinations for river recreation.
Thanks a lot. Now, I'll throw all the questions to the panelists randomly, but I'll start with Martin. Martin, how do the river restoration networks ensure that the latest scientific and traditional knowledge as well are integrated into the restoration plans and the restoration activities?
I mean, I guess it's like everyone's already said that we need to be working as a community. We really need to be working at a local, at a national, regional, and a global level, which is easy to say, but trying to then get that into restoration plans is a little bit more tricky. So one of the best ways of doing that is to make sure that the scientists and the researchers are actively working with local communities, so that the science and the research is done for the benefit and involving those local communities and the restoration work that's going on. But equally, we need those local communities to be using that science and actively feeding back on that. So we really need those two sort of sectors not working in isolation, but really combining and working together. Otherwise, you get great science that comes out, but doesn't really answer the questions that the local restoring community need. And you get the restoration ideas that are coming up, but don't have the scientific backing because the scientific community don't know that's what's required. So it really is a case of working together and really getting that information out. And from a practical level, once we have the science, we need to get the science into methods and tools. We need to get those methods and tools trained up so that people know how to use them. They need to be applied in practice, and then we need the science back to work out what's working, how can we improve this, how can we make things better, what are the results, and we go around in a continuous circle, but we need to be working together across those sectors as a single community.
Thanks, Martin. I'm sorry, I have to mute and turn on my microphone because I think there's some feedback when there's many microphones on, but I hope you could hear me okay. Joe, I will go next to you, and can you please tell us more? I know you've highlighted Resilient Rivers Initiative and the local governments that are involved. If you could share some mechanisms by which the SEQ Council of Mayors are brought together for this very focused type of activity of resilience that came from the floods, the mechanisms to sustain the group, Joe, would be good to share.
Yeah, sure, Eva. So initially, as I mentioned earlier, Resilient Rivers was purely a local government initiative, but as we went through a review process, we actually recognised the importance to have a really strong relationship between local and state government because of the different levels of responsibility. So it's more recently been expanded, and we have a true partnership between state and local government with also federal government funding. So governance and planning are a key focus area for our program. In the governance space, we've brought together, as I said, the multiple levels of government, and in some cases, multiple departments, just based on the different roles and responsibilities of the different groups. So what this actually does is it provides a space for these various levels of government and departments to come together and discuss key issues and reach a shared understanding so that we can take a collaborative and coordinated approach to protection, management and rehabilitation of our rivers. Our highest level of government is actually ministers and mayors. We then have a executive level governance group and then an officer level governance group, as well as catchment coordinators. So it's a very lean, mean style of governance, which enables quick and efficient communication. The other space is planning. So Resilient Rivers is an initiative in Shaping SEQ, which is our regional plan. And so that gives the initiative a head of power to operate in the role of coordinating catchment management to facilitate real outcomes. Beneath that, there's a joint strategy between state and local government. And then we're just about to develop review catchment action plans and develop new catchment action plans that will set some clear targets and methods to measure them. The final thing I will say is obviously we operate in an adaptive management framework. So reviewing and adaptively managing everything we're doing is critical.
Thanks, Joe. Salvador, you mentioned you have a partnership, the Rotary has a partnership with UNEP, and we recognize the critical role of civic and community-based organizations like Rotary in river restoration efforts. Would be good if you could give us some examples of success stories, and especially dealing with on-ground work that your group does.
Certainly, there's many to be able to share in one single, just a few minutes. But just to start with, UNEP and Rotary partner in Kenya, Ethiopia to do some restoration of the Nairobi River. And from that success, and they engaged with many Rotary clubs in all along the Nairobi River. And from that success, we actually expanded that partnership to what it is today, the Community Action for Fresh Water. So what we're doing right now is acting local, and then also partnering with Rotary clubs on the global area. And how does that happen? Is that the local Rotary clubs connect with the local NGOs, such as an example in Guatemala, the Rotarians partner with over 60 NGOs and local government agencies for working on the Motagua River cleanup and restoration, making a plan for the next 10 years to be able to restore it. And if you research about what's happening in the Motagua River, it's a really huge catastrophe of plastic pollution. So this is a perfect example of local engagement from the local partnerships on the Rotary clubs, and then seeing what is important. And in one of the presentations discussed about education and awareness and reach of the communities. So what the Rotary clubs are doing is supporting efforts to educate on the schools, to educate on the environment education, providing computers to the schools. So there is a buy-in of the students, the buy-in from the families, the communities themselves, and making them aware of the situation of the pollution on the Motagua River itself. At the same time, donations come in from the local clubs themselves, but also from international side. So when there is grants, we always try to fill in the gap, and we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's the reason why we always encourage us to partner with different NGOs or other organizations that are already working and have the expertise on the subject.
Thank you, Salvador. And we'll talk about the river restoration networks later on. And we could see that whole, collaboration, perhaps future of the different restoration networks and the different civic communities happening more strongly in the long run. I'll go to Scott. Scott, you introduced yourself as the balance between the recreation side as well as the restoration side of rivers. So could you perhaps give us some, of your insights in terms of how we balance ecological restoration and the need for human recreation of our rivers? Or maybe we don't need to balance, Scott.
No, it's a great question. And I'm a big believer in sort of thinking of rivers and projects within rivers at the watershed level, but they often happen at the local level, right? There's a town or a city, and they're saying, we want to see this happen in a certain place and in a certain way. We had a flood last year, and we recognize we have to take our river that's very confined and create a floodplain for it, or we have a dam and it's not doing anything. And how do we start to create something useful for our town from that dam, or remove it and create this longitudinal connectivity that's there? We also find that you're hearing a lot of this. How do we fund projects? How do we brand projects? How do we get people excited about stewardship? And the reality is that most people interact with rivers in urban or semi-urban environments, right? They interact with them where they live. And so what we do is come in and say, hey, let's take what you have and create something that's a benefit to your economy, that's a benefit to your community, where you can come down and touch and feel that river where that river can stop being a confined, time bomb essentially for the next flood, to something that's more naturalized, that can absorb some of those impacts within the realities of that already developed urban environment, and say, look, now this thing that you used to turn your back on is someplace where your kids can play by the river, and where you can commute on your bikes along that riverfront, and where there's events, and there's there's play, and there's competitions and festivals and things like that. And so when you start to transform, and I think Boulder, Colorado is a great example where they took that little creek and turned it into something that's one of the major attractions, but also one of the major commuter routes through town. And so you're seeing people come to kayak, to bike, to sit by the river, to tube. And I think in doing so, removing dams and creating connectivity so that you have this positive impact to the watershed, even though it's not pure restoration that you can see somewhere outside that urban environment. So I think this role of bringing recreation to where people are, and at the same time transforming rivers into things that meet the objectives for that bigger watershed, is really where that interaction happens.
Thanks, Scott. And that also reinforced, I think Shuan showed a photo of, when you give the river flows, then you get all the kayakers more involved. And so that's that whole juxtaposition of recreation, but also the need to look after our rivers, protect and or restore. I was going to ask one more round of questions, but I might circumvent that and get the other speakers to turn their speakers on, because then I'm going to get you guys to respond to this question from, I think it is from Prahlad. And it's really around, and it's relevant. I don't know if you can read it. It's on the chat, but I'll read it. Given how quickly policies and legislation can unravel, there's an example here of the Trump government, but it does, right? Even from political party to another political party, it seems that what we once thought was a firmly institutionalized structure or framework can be undone almost overnight. So would river restoration be faced with this challenge? And if so, what would be a good strategy? I know it's a very loaded and big question, but I could probably get the panelists, if you want to respond, who would like to take that on. Martin, perfect.
Yeah, just to start, I guess. We've seen, maybe not on the scale that's happening in the US at the moment, but we have seen this happen before. Funding principles come and go, governments change their mind, and I think what glues this together is what we've all been talking about already, which is the local community, the strength, the awareness and education of individual people who make up the electorate. If they want something different, our young people want something different, something to change, then it will change, and those policies will have to adapt to that, because otherwise policies won't get any traction, governments that come in won't get any traction. So we need to be working to ensure that we are conveying the messages that might be quite specific in terms of what we want to achieve across the whole of the community, the whole sort of nation, and from ECRR's point of view, across nations, to try to share that best practice, not necessarily of how we go about doing something on the ground to a river, but what we want to see as the outcome for that. Because in that way, then we will be able to help to shape those policies and to ensure that those policies are doing the right thing for what we need to be happening on our rivers.
Thanks. Ian.
This is a great question. It really gets to the heart of a lot of what we're talking about here, which is about the persistence of what we're doing. And if I can make 3 quick points. The first one is, this is really where what Stuart was talking about branding and about description. What we call things is really important. The language that we use is really important. And in this river health, restoration, water quality space, there's room for all political persuasions. And it often just depends how you call things. The second thing is I've worked in government under both conservative and, if you like, progressive governments. And the reality is there are good aspects in both colours of government, if you like. For example, I remember working under a conservative government who were very strict on farmers and on beneficiary pays. So that and having that principle really let us do some fantastic policy work around restoration. So it doesn't really matter. You've got both opportunities in both colours of government. And the second thing is there's always depth of a mix of government persuasions. So we've got local, national, state governments, and you'll find this in the US. The Commonwealth government, or not Commonwealth, whatever they call it in the States, your national government has a particular persuasion at the moment, but the states have very different views on all of this sort of thing, and I think that will buffer the what's going on. And we should use this time to plan for when the governments change back to a different persuasion, and then we should be ready to go.
That's 4 years. Yeah.
4 years we've got thousands of years to go to fix our rivers.
All right. Anybody else from the panel would one more comment? And what I'll do is I'll give you half a minute each. Or maybe we'll just go straight to half a minute, because that could be included in that one. I'll give the 10 panel members, the speakers, the 10 speakers and the 10 panel members, half a minute max each. So 1 minute as to what do you think would be a call for action that we could collate. I'll start with Stuart. I'll start from the top.
Putting me on the spot. Okay, yeah, I think I'll keep it brief. I think great answers to the last question. I think the amazing thing about science is it doesn't really give a damn what you think. And I think so politicians will come and go, attitudes will sway, but the reality is that economies, people, corporates, insurance companies, everybody's going to be feeling the impacts of water in their environments. And so the policy environment for us, I think, is actually better than worse. And I think we have to take advantage of it in the right ways, be very clever ourselves. And I think what we can do as a community, and this is a great start, is we need to learn from each other, come together. We need to share the successes, not just on the implementation at field level, but also at the policy and language level. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks. It's hard to know where to start when there's so many great ideas coming out today. I would really like to emphasise the point of protection, and the reason I'm emphasising this is because we've all been involved in these projects. It's so easy to destroy rivers, and it's so expensive to fix them. But the whole enterprise of protection means we're often, and people call it the impair and repair model. We spend all this time impairing, and then we suddenly flip to repairing it. There are lots of places in the world where we haven't yet impaired it, but protecting those rivers has cultural and social and political costs, which we need to understand. Are we going to take away the opportunity because water is important for economic development? Just a final example of this. The last and undammed river in Asia is the Salween River in Myanmar. The reason it's undammed is because of political conflict in that state. And it's they are unbelievable rivers that we would love to protect. But as that country comes out of conflict, are we going to restrict the opportunities of those disadvantaged people who've been disadvantaged for decades because we have a particular view of what rivers should be protected? So I do think we need to confront the complexities of protection, but it's a critical thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Bart?
Yes, thank you, Eva. Yeah, my message is rather simple, and I learned it mainly from Siwan from Australia. Her first call was bring the people to the river. I translated into a little bit different phrase, bring the policymakers and the planners. They are more stable than the politicians. Bring those to the river together with the people who are working on the ground. And this is what we did together in this presentation of the three networks. That's our daily job, and we experience that that's very learningful and binds the people also more privately to the jobs and to the needs that needs to be fulfilled. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. Now we will go to our river restoration networks. We'll start with Van Graan.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, we could hear you.
Can you? Yeah. Eva.
Yes.
Yeah, I had I think I had already benefit a lot from the very valuable insights from the colleagues, and I had raised some challenges and questions faced in the restoration practices in China. I think most of the aspects had been considered in your experiences. For example, the goals for the objectives for the restoration and for the urban river, and you also mentioned the solutions for the climate change, and also I also benefit from the very very nice presentations from other networks, very good experiences in the river restoration. For example, the removal of the small hydropowers is also happening in China. In the small rivers are doing the removal of the old small hydropowers, and also personally I also we did some research on the. We did a research for the first removal of the hydropower station on the Yellow River, on the South Yellow River South, and also we studied the eco-hydraulics and consider the suspended sediments and the water quality and migration fish to be considered in the reservoir regulation in the Yellow River and some other rivers near the coast in China. So I think there are a lot of things in common with the experts. We have a lot of opportunities for future cooperation.
Thank you. That's good, Van Graan. I think the call for action there, as you said, is that sharing of information and experiences. I think not only across the networks, but across as well in terms of knowledge, models, decision support tools, which we could talk more about later on. Thank you, Van Graan, and thank you to the network. Now I'll go over to Shuan.
Thanks, Eva. I think it really comes down to that last sentence, you know, alone we can do a little, together we can do a lot. And this afternoon has just renewed my faith in this sector, and I sort of go to myself, wow, okay, I need to get more in touch with some international people now. So really, I think it's celebrating what we've achieved so far and continue to look for the future, but knowing that there's a number of people alongside us.
Thank you, Shuan. And hopefully we will carry this to a special session during the International River Symposium. Can I call on Karen, please, from a European Centre perspective?
Thank you, Eva. And thank you all presenters. It has been really interesting to hear you all. And I can only agree with you in everything. But I would like to send a message that we have to have a quite broad toolbox, because every river is unique, every community is unique. They have their own experience, problems, and so on. So we have to have a toolbox that we can take different tools depending on the river, the community, what the stakeholders are, to get the most out of it and listen to each other, because we can have these networks, we can make people come together, but if it doesn't listen to each other, it will not help. So I think that's a really good lesson that I have learned, that when you put together NGOs like the Swedish Angler Association with the hydropower company in the same project, you have to be certain that they really listen to each other. So we don't have a conflict in the project, because you have different partners that have different interests. So I think really to have this toolbox that you can choose the right tools for the right river and community.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. I'll go over to Joe, because Martin already gave us his, from what I understood, Martin, you've given us raw science, and I love that. I've put that as the call for action. Joe, to you.
Thanks, Eva. Look, humans are central to all of this. We have to work together to achieve what we're trying to achieve. We have to work with people with a diversity of backgrounds and experiences. And so ultimately, building relationships is critical, and trust. And my good colleagues at DETSI often discuss and remind me of the importance of trust. So we need to take time to build relationships so that we can trust one another. And that goes, within the community, the river rehabilitation community, likewise between professionals and elected officials, ministers and mayors, and the people working with landholders on the ground.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Eva.
So one thing is, as it was mentioned earlier, politicians come and go, but the people stay. I'm a firm believer that that's the reason why I connected always with service clubs, in this case with Rotary clubs. They always stay. They always are trying to help their communities. They're passionate about serving the community and making the best way they can do to make this world a better place. So I'm a firm believer in partnerships. So partnerships. Encourage everybody to connect with service clubs in any area that you're working at, because that can actually help you also turn the tide on the politician side. Many times they're influential. They're able to influence the situations and make things better and easier sometimes. So again, always connect with, a Rotary club where you're working.
Thanks, Adore. And now, last but not least, our Olympian, Scott. There you go.
I've seen so many projects happen at a local level in which, those local politicians are trying to make a sale to their community on why they should do this. And so my call to action to everybody on this call is to think about that human element, because when a community can touch and feel and experience a river corridor, and when it becomes a part of the brand of that town that they are a river town and a destination, that's a community that really starts to get behind these projects that are transformational along the river. And so when you're trying to find some engagement, I just encourage all of you to think about that human element and how that can really affect getting projects done.
Thank you. I will thank you now, but Jody will be thanking you all again later on. But before I would like to hand over very briefly to Phil, just to talk about especially the International River Symposium. Over to you, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Eva, and really congratulations to all the speakers and participants from today's session. It's been exactly why the International River Symposium is a incredibly valuable opportunity of people coming together, sharing experiences. It's the first time in a long time online I've felt that same feeling of being in a room, in a conference room, and I can just say thank you to all of the people here. The intent of these events, these satellite events, I'm a board member of the IRF. The intent was to build the dialogue leading up to the International River Symposium that will take place at the beginning of September, and you've done a great job in doing that. There will be 2 additional satellite events that will take place. The next one is on talking what we call toxic currents, addressing the world's plastic crisis. And then in July, Indigenous Voices for our world's rivers. These are all parts of the dialogue that we want to have happen leading up so that this conversation can continue in person at the International River Symposium in the beginning of September 8th to September 10th. And we would encourage all of you to, if you can, be present and to continue the kind of inspiration and positive sharing of experiences that has gone on here in this session. And once again, on behalf of the board of IRF, I can just say thank you to everybody who's participated and to really what a quite large audience that from around the world, different perspectives on this particular topic. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you in Brisbane in September. Actually, the one thing, sorry, I have forgotten is, which the slide has just reminded me, one of the key elements of the International River Foundation is the river prizes, the acknowledgement from the community of the positive successes. The applications for the 2025 TISA International River Prize are now open, and many of the people on this call are ones who potentially have rivers that may be ones that would be good candidates for the International River Prize. And I would encourage you to get the application form and encourage any rivers that you're working with or connected with to see about the possibility of putting an application for that prize, which is a remarkable acknowledgement of the efforts that have been taken around the world and in particular locations to try to restore or protect rivers. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Over to you, Joe or Michael. Jody.
Sorry, team, was having a bit of trouble with my mic. Don't give up your day jobs, please, everybody. As you said, Bart, this is your day job, and you're incredible people, and you truly are making a difference in the world. So thank you to everybody for being here today. Thank you to our audience for being here. I invite you to Brisbane. Please come to the International River Symposium in September. I think the key takeouts from today was Stuart Orr, water is adaptation as carbon is to mitigation. Ian Rutherford, restore where we are and protect where we can. And then I think the best from today was really about ensuring that, I guess, alone we can do a little, but together we can do a lot. So thank you, Eva, and to the team and the board for supporting this initiative. Thank you to our reactor panel as well. You're all amazing, diverse people. We can't do things traditionally anymore. We need to include a diverse group, and I think the media is definitely part of that system. So, and thanks again to Steve and Armour Waterways for sponsoring this. I'll hand it back to you, Eva. You've done a great job. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jared. It is a pleasure to facilitate such an inspirational bunch of river restoration passionate on-ground doers. So it's my privilege to be able to do that. We look forward, of course, as Jody's indicated, to seeing you during the IRS and our future satellites. In terms of where to from here, we will synthesize, especially the call to action that you have heard, and Olivia will send you the recording of this session straight after. And I think that would be all for me. All I could say is on behalf of the team, thank you and stay safe. And we'll see you around.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.